right, well, welcome to the Geeks vs. Games. I'm Colby.
And I'm Phil.
Today we're bringing you a review of Stronghold 2nd Edition, published by Portal Games and Stronghold Games, and designed by Ignacy Trzewiczek. So, in Stronghold 2nd Edition, it's a two-player game that the box says it lasts about 90 minutes. In this game, you have an invader and a defender. The two players play on opposite sides, and the invader is trying to break into the stronghold within 7 turns. If the defender can keep the invader from doing that for 7 turns, the defender wins. If the invader is able to break in, the invader wins. The players will play by choosing a bunch of different actions and spending resources to further their strategy. Go ahead and start with the negatives. The first thing for me, since I bought this game and I had played it through a few times solo to figure out the rules, is the rulebook. This is supposed to be a 2nd edition, and the rulebook was impossible to navigate. Now, Portal has come out and apologized for that. They've put out actually 2 new rulebooks since the game was published, and Rodney Smith from Watch It Played has put out a Watch It Played video, learn to play watching the video. That's very good quality. So Portal Games is doing what they can to get this into the hands of people and to help people to learn how to play, but it was definitely impossible to navigate that rulebook the first time. Second thing is that this is a 2-player game only, so it's not one that you can necessarily play at every game night.
Yeah.
You can't play it with 4 people. There's no even setup for teams like you have in War of the Ring or some other 2-player games.
The third negative, which was big for me, are these tiny, tiny blocks. If you have children or you have a tendency to lose things, I would be very careful when you purchase this game, if you do end up purchasing it, to keep track of these blocks. And even the pieces, although well done for the people inside the defenders, they're still rather small, but comparatively I much prefer the miniatures inside the city. If there were some kind of discs or even larger blocks, it would have been a lot better.
The biggest negative for me probably, and this might improve with experience as we play the game more, is in this game I was the defender and Phil was the invader. But as the defender, you have to stop a certain amount of invader units from being on each wall section. And that means that sometimes this game can get a little bit mathy. You'll sit there and look at the worst case scenarios at a couple of different wall sections where you'll be fighting. For instance, in our last round here, there's combat at 5 different wall sections. So that meant that I had to run through every single wall section as the defender to determine if he could break through and if there was anything I could do to prevent him from breaking through.
But that might be a positive thing for some people, because I know personally that I have plenty of friends that don't really enjoy dice. They don't like the random aspect. And the fact that they can add up their numbers and see where they are on the field and calculate exactly what it's going to take to win in those certain areas, some people may see that as a positive. But personally, it can get a little overwhelming, especially for new players if you were only to play one-on-one, because there's no one there to help you. There's no team aspect. This is extremely duel-based.
Yeah, and I actually have no problem with the mathiness. I just think it's something that people should be aware of
definitely.
Going into this game. That this is a very, in some ways it feels kind of dry. The math part of it feels kind of dry.
Enough about the negatives. We really enjoyed this game. I really enjoyed it playing for my first time. So for the positives, it's extremely thematic. Now I'm not saying, you see the models come out or anything like that, but the actions you can choose are extremely thematic. So as the defender, watching as I was attacking, all the troops he was bringing out and the things he was doing to stop me, like traps and archers and building more soldiers and bringing them back, because he had a hospital in here and he could only bring back a certain amount of troops. It's extremely thematic. It feels like he's just being overwhelmed the entire time. And as the attacker, I felt like I had just so many troops I was throwing at the walls, and they're supposed to be orcs and goblins and trolls, and they swarm the walls, and I thought that was a very good job. Especially the layout of the board. It made it very, very interesting, especially planning out where I'd put my catapults and my ballistas and all that stuff. It was very good. I really enjoyed that aspect.
Along with that, one of the biggest positive I have about this game is that it offers a lot of freedom.
Yeah.
Another Ignacy Trzewiczek game, Robinson Crusoe, I feel like is very similar. In that game, you can do a myriad of different actions, and it's the same thing here. The invader has a lot of freedom. The defender has a lot of freedom. And so on our negative side, we talk about the math and how this game is fairly complicated. the good aspect of that is because there are so many different strategies, you can really do whatever you want. And that allows you to have those thematic moments where you feel like you're playing out a movie. You know, the Siege of Helm's Deep. That thematic idea too, I think the game board art and the tokens and everything, they're not only functional, but I think they're very beautiful, especially the board.
Yeah.
I think it really conveys the theme and does a good job of also signaling the function of the board. All the units can be placed in spots, and those spots are clearly marked on the board. So that helps with the complexity of this game. It helps new players.
Things for me as the attacker I noticed were these bigger dials here. These represent hero tokens that are on the field. And honestly, they make this game to the point where it's an even fight on both sides. If they had chosen not to include these pieces, it probably would have been a one-way route. It just wouldn't have been balanced. These heroes add an aspect of these order tokens that they can use for free that really bring a sense of desperation as the defender, that you can really get those last movements into place and defend your wall.
And the last thing for us is just this game has immense replayability. Going along with all of those options, the invader has a certain amount of cards that they use to choose their different actions. You use 3 of those cards out of a selection of 5 every game. So that means the possibilities in this game are literally going to be endless, especially for how often a lot of people on Board Game Geek play games. This game, you can get a lot of replayability out of it before you can ever see the same combination.
Definitely.
So let's move to final
First
thoughts.
time, I would totally play it again. I'm excited to play as the defender. And I really enjoyed it. Now, I would not recommend this game for anybody that would... it's 2 hours long. You know, it's a 90-minute game, and this was my first time playing, and to explain it to somebody who has never played board games before, I would be a little hesitant about it. I would include the video that we have linked below, make sure that they watch that, and give them some kind of precursor so they don't come into the game and they get overwhelmed with the amount of stuff on the field. But if you have experienced board game players, and you have somebody that you're extremely competitive with, I think this is a great game. This you could switch sides multiple times. There's multiple strategies you can do, and as Colby said, this is extremely replayable. So for all those aspects together, I would definitely look into this game if you were interested in it.
Yeah, definitely, I agree. I pre-ordered this game from Stronghold Games directly, and I haven't been disappointed with my purchase. I think this has been a great game. One of the aspects I love the most about it is that as the defender, so much of what you do is dependent on what the invader has done. Not in the sense that you have to necessarily, that they define your strategy, but it allows you to have very responsive gameplay. It's very reflexive. In some ways, we were talking about how it feels a little bit like Android Netrunner, where you have to respond to the defenses that are set up and also the attacks that are made against you. And so I really like that aspect. It feels very much like a head-to-head battle, and I definitely recommend it if you're interested in a game of this complexity and weight. I don't think you'll go wrong.